I studied at the old college, which was famous for its history and terrible legends. One evening, after exhausting classes, I decided to spend the night in the library, preparing for exams. The library was well lit and quiet, and I felt comfortable in it. Sitting at a table with a bunch of educational materials, I noticed a strange book lying on a shelf in the corner. The cover of the book was worn out, and there were symbols carved on it that I couldn't recognize. Not knowing how this book ended up here, I decided to take it and look at it. As soon as I opened the book, I was seized with a strange feeling, as if I had lost touch with time and space. The pages were covered with incomprehensible drawings and symbols, and I felt my head begin to spin. Suddenly, I was in a different place. In front of me stretched the gallery of a medieval castle. The floor was covered with dark marble, and the walls were hung with heavy curtains. I was wearing clothes that seemed completely incomprehensible, a light tunic and sandals. I couldn't figure out how I ended up here. The surroundings were picturesque, but at the same time, something terrible enveloped everything around. In the distance, I saw a group of mysterious hooded figures standing around an altar on which something dark and indescribable was lying. I tried to leave, but my legs didn't seem to obey, and I was rooted to the spot. Mysterious figures began to perform some kind of mystical ritual, and the room was filled with strange sounds and an atmosphere of evil. After I woke up in the library, I tried to figure out what had happened with bewilderment. The book I was holding in my hands was closed, but it remained like a second door to the world of nightmares. In the following days and weeks, I began to explore its contents. Despite feeling anxious and apprehensive, the pages of the book were filled with strange stories and images of nightmarish places and creatures. With each page, I felt that something dark and sinister was approaching my reality. I started having these dreams again, but this time they became more and more real. In my dream, I found myself in the same medieval setting, and the nightmarish figures gathered around the altar again. They started whispering mystical words, and I felt like my life was hanging by a thread. Suddenly, they raised their heads and looked around in my direction. Their eyes were as black as absolute darkness. They ordered me to approach the altar, and my ability to control my body and will disappeared. I was a puppet in their hands, and my life became a pawn in their sinister game. My nightmares became more and more real and painful, and I felt like they were invading my reality. I was losing sleep and started hearing whispers and seeing ghostly figures even when I was awake. My friends and family began to notice that something was wrong with me. I felt that my life was slipping into absolute darkness and hopelessness, and I couldn't tell where the dream ends and reality begins. Whether I was a prisoner of my nightmares or a victim of some ancient and sinister influence remains a mystery. But whatever it was, I felt like I couldn't fight anymore and was thrown into a world of endless nightmare. Every day, the nightmares became more intense and terrible, and it became more difficult to distinguish reality from nightmare. I struggled with the dark forces, trying to find a way to free myself from this nightmare, but to no avail. One day, in one of my nightmares, I found myself in a medieval castle again. However, this time, I decided to take a chance and explore the environment around me. I walked through the hall, entering an ancient corridor, and suddenly I heard a whisper from behind a closed door. Unable to resist, I entered the room and saw a round table with an open book on it, similar to the one that led me into this nightmare. There were also tools on the table for performing some strange ritual. The book was covered with strange symbols and drawings, and I felt that it was the key to my salvation or immersion in an endless nightmare. Fear paralyzed me, but my resolve was stronger. The power of the dark world began to pull me back, but I managed to tear a leaf from this page and slip out of the room before I could be absorbed. When I woke up in reality, I realized that that leaf was the key to the solution. I studied it and tried to interpret the mysterious symbols. Suddenly, it dawned on me. These symbols were part of the birth control that could save me from nightmares. I've spent the last few days searching for information and trying to perform a ritual. Despite my fear and doubts, I felt that this was the only way to get rid of the dark forces that were chasing me. Finally, the moment came when I decided to perform the ritual. I followed the instructions from that terrible book and uttered forbidden words. At that moment, the world around me began to distort, and I felt that I was on the verge between reality and a nightmare. After the ritual, I woke up in my bed, and this time, the nightmares were gone. I left that terrible book in the place where I found it, in the library, and never looked at it again. To this day, I still can't determine if it was the real world or a journey into the dark depths of my mind. All I know is that the mysterious book and the nightmares it brought no longer haunt me. Some of the news about the college disappeared, faded away, as if they had never existed. None of my friends or professors remembered my strange adventures. Perhaps I had found a way to free myself from the nightmares and erase all traces of what had happened, or it was just part of some even more mysterious conspiracy. I will never again dare to take the risk that I took when I took that terrible book. My life was literally on the verge between reality and a nightmare, and I feel that some kind of danger will always hang over me, ready to return at any moment. The mystery of this story remains unsolved, and I cannot be sure that it was all just a fantasy or really a dream. However, one thing I know for sure: sometimes it's better for us to leave some mysteries unsolved, so as not to risk opening doors that are better left locked.